Well, where are you? Did you drive on the roads at all too, or just stayed home because of the roads?
I just stayed home. I
Good.
do have an evening class I have to drive to, so I'm hoping the roads won't be bad later.
Well, this is this is our last week of regular classes, and we do have a meeting both today and Thursday. But then next week we just have the one class, and the the screen you're seeing. I'm assuming you can see a screen.
It's the Chat GPT screen about the development of the telescope.
Good. Okay. Um, what I wanted to do is your camera is being used by other apps.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm having trouble getting the camera on. Hi, Elaine. I switched.
Good morning, Professor. How are you?
I'm still alive and kicking. Although, actually, I'm not kicking anything. I don't know why we say that.
I'm glad you're here.
Except I'm not getting the camera on. And now I don't even have the screen. In fact, it's acting like I'm not even in the meeting. Nope, it's still not turning on. But you can still hear me.
Yes.
Very interesting. Oh well. All right, so today we're supposed to talk about scientific arguments or scientific reasoning. And my quiz question for everyone is, who's your favorite scientist? I got a lot of good responses to who's your favorite composer. Most of them were Beethoven. I kind of led the way on that one, I suppose. But I don't know if you've ever listened to late Handel or late Mozart or early Beethoven. It's very hard to tell the difference, actually. But when it comes to scientists, who do we all know and love? Well, maybe Galileo, I don't know. And when we're talking about scientific inquiry or the nature of inquiry itself, what I really should start with is let me ask ChatGPT something here. This is an old one. I think I can ask ChatGPT. What were the stages of inquiry according to John Dewey. And ChatGPT hopefully will give me the stages that we all know and love, probably used in our even grammar school projects. If you did science projects, I just realized I'm actually a couple minutes early. But notice it says the first stage of inquiry, according to John Dewey, and who I should actually explain John Dewey as an American philosopher, pragmatist, educator. In fact, his biggest impact. Have you heard of John Dewey before? Okay. When I mention John Dewey, a lot of people right away first think of the Dewey Decimal System, and that's actually a different Dewey. In fact, I'm not sure that person was even John Dewey, but in any case, John Dewey was born in Vermont, went to the Vermont College or University of Vermont with his brothers. He actually had older brothers, and for some reason, the family sent them all together. So he was the youngest going to the university with his older brothers. But he became familiar with philosophy, and specifically Hegel's philosophy while he was there. And if you remember, Hegel as the flag bearer, so to speak, of the romantic philosophers, the ones that kind of took over after Kant. And so their answer to Kant's question, or the question we pose after Kant, how do we structure our phenomena as human beings? What enables us to perceive things the way we do? And Kant opened that up to us by pointing out that unlike everyone before him that thought that we just see things the way they are, he came to realize, thanks to the philosophy that went before him, especially David Hume, that actually everything that we experience is in our mind, and there's no way we can actually see things in themselves. And yet at the same time, we obviously share a lot in common. So the question was, okay, if it's not the nature of the things in themselves that actually structure our experience, then what is it? And his answer was that there's a structure imposed by our perception as human beings, that number one gives us a sense that there is time. We experience everything as if it's in a flow of time. So we can't experience anything unless we feel like time is elapsing in some way, right? So for him, that's an a priori. That has to happen before you can have phenomena in the first place. The second thing he talks about is if we experience something having dimensions, and not everything does, like abstract concepts, like love maybe. You know, if you're thinking about love, the concept, and not a particular, miserable swing in tennis or whatever. Right? Love means zero in tennis, I think. But that could have been funny, maybe. But in any case, there are abstract concepts that don't take up space. But if we're thinking about things that have dimensions, we have to have a sense of space. And by the way, for Kant, the concept of space comes from us, so that the dimensions and things that I'm experiencing are focused on my perceiving self. And that's going to be critical when we compare that with Sir Isaac Newton, because remember, Sir Isaac Newton thought space was actually an object out there that we could simply measure and so on. Thanks to Kant, we come to realize that actually space has a basis in the perceiver. And so, of course, if perceivers have different ways of perceiving space, there are different types of space out there, different types of geometries. I mean, that hadn't been invented yet, or discovered yet. But now today we know not only is there the geometry of curved spaces as opposed to the imaginary space that Sir Isaac Newton gives us, where everything is all like straight lines. And the big difference is in the fifth proposition, where Euclid says that straight, parallel lines never meet. With curved lines, parallel lines do meet. They come together like at the poles of the Earth, and so on. So, there's different kinds of geometries. And some mathematicians argue that means that the Euclidean geometry was simply wrong, and that curved space, thank you, Einstein, means that hyperbolic geometries are true and Euclidean geometries are false. Well, but I mean, it's very clear to me, at least, that the smarter mathematicians recognize that actually both geometries are models, and we being models, we create models. We can, the best I've heard is we could literally have an infinite number of geometries depending on what we need them for. We can create different kinds of models. And they do. There's all kinds already. But so Kant gives us, this question of how do we structure our experience. He has his categories of perception, categories of judgment, categories of thought, all of which are pretty much based on Aristotle's original categories. But for Aristotle, those categories were characteristics of things in themselves. But by the time we get to Kant, we realize we can't actually talk about the things in themselves because our limits of our abilities limit us to our thoughts and not to the objects in themselves. Even Locke talked about them as, remember, he had the problem of the thing in itself, which you can't see, hear, taste, touch, or anything, the thing in itself, because what you're experiencing is the interrelationship between your sense of taste and the orange. So the reason oranges taste the way they do to us is not because oranges taste a certain way, it's because that's how our senses taste the orange, right? And the same thing applies to our sight. The reason we see colors the way we do is because that's the way our eyes work. And by the way, not all of our eyes work the same way. It's absolutely cool when we get into languages. What we discover is, depending on the colors that you believe are there based on your language, you actually see colors differently. That's measurable. They've measured different people with different languages and different people within microseconds, but they can tell differences in colors depending on the way their language. Right? Have you heard this? No?
I'm a little. So you're saying that if different people speak different languages can perceive a color a different way? Then
Yes.
like if someone speaks Spanish, they can perceive red differently than someone who speaks.
Well, I'm not so sure about Spanish per se, because you're looking at a set of European languages that are all kind of nested in a tree. Where did Latin come from? And then Latin gives us, when the Romans were attacking Iberia, they were speaking a dialect that became Spanish. When they were attacking France, they were Gaul. They were attacking people with a dialect. I mean, the Roman soldiers had a dialect that was slightly different than when they were. There are different times when the Romans attacked the different places. This is a theory, so the language that they left the country with was the dialect that the soldiers spoke at that time. So French is different than Spanish, although you could see the connection to Latin. Italian is essentially the latest version of Latin. You know, Romanian is actually a Latin type, you know, etc. But when you listen to, let's go to a person who's much more entertaining than me.
I look at it this way, like language is based on culture. The more varied a culture is, less cultural exchange there is, the more variability there's